Good morning. I'm here to greet the vinyl community. Today's Good Friday, April 18th, 2025. I'm reading a chapter called Early Evasions in the 80s. When I first began communicating with Charlie in the mid to late 80s, our conversations and correspondence rarely delved into the crimes he still probably believed to be responsible for. Our discussions veered to the mystical, musical, chemical, historical, and sexual. He seemed more urgent, interested in his music and the crusade against pollution than rehashing the role of the murders forever merged with his name. We talked about the art of song, wildlife, mysticism, war, women, the nature of mind and reality. Discussion of criminality other than the many scams he was getting away with operating behind bars, but mostly limited to his encyclopedic interest in the history of the mafia and the underworld aggressions. If he chose to bring the topic to the crimes up, I listened, but lacking any solid inside information into the Cielo Waverly mystery in those early days of our occasion, I could only take what he said at face value. I'd known enough convicts to know that the last thing they wanted to hear about was why they're locked up. At first, our relations were too focused on getting things done in the present to be overly occupied with the past. Almost immediately, we set out to locate missing music tapes. He wished to be recovered and released. In the midst of his nasty conflict with his old crime partner, Neil Emmons, he collaborated on getting the first edition of the Manson file together as a countermeasure. A few more specifics emerged when Charlie grumbled about some details of the crimes he and Emmons misquoted him in his book, Manson in his own words. That was mostly about his accessory roles after the murders and his anger that his homicidal friends weren't professional enough to remove evidence, nothing about motive itself. One of the most intriguing passages of the far from reliable book is Edmonds paraphrasing Charlie, noting that the fact that Tex Watson was carrying out drug burns even before he met him. It captured my attention. Hadn't that Republican speed and acid dealer I mentioned in Chapter 0 impressed upon me what he called Watson's particularly as a drug dealer? Emmons questioned Charles as saying of the freeloader Watson, most reports on Watson overlooked the activities in California before he became associated with me. The 2 years he spent using drugs and pushing dope, burning everyone he came into conflict with, is forgotten. The significance Charles placed on this little discussed aspect of Watson's criminal career is left dangling in Edwin's book without further mention. In private conversation, but not in his book, Edmonds himself, a convicted drug dealer with extensive knowledge of that secretive trade, stated his unambiguous belief that dope dealing played a major role in mayhem our most mutual friend was blamed for. At the time when Charlie was still more than less telling me that the crimes were largely about the girls' plot to free their beloved Bobby, T.J. Waldeman lent plot further weight to the dealing drug angle. While carefully rolling a joint, he told me that Sharon Tate died in just another drug deal gone wrong, one of the dozens that went down the summer. A deal that, according to him, had nothing to do with Charlie Manson, everything to do with Charlie Watson. Pressed on elaborate, he withdrew into an awkward silence. I now regret that I didn't do more to Pierce. See, I met TJ when I was a little kid, but I can't go into that. In 1984, efforts to find Charlie a lawyer for his stated goal of appealing for a mistrial based on Bugliosi's misconduct touched on matters of innocence and guilt, but not in detail. The bureaucratic gymnastics required to ensure prison approval for the planned concert interview film that became Charles Manson's Superstar in 1988 took central focus after that. Same screening media requires from countless TV shows when he was in demand as scary ratings bait for a full-time job in itself. Charlie often waxed knowledge about his happier days at the ranch, reminiscing about his favorite horses, Silver and Major. He most practiced without he preached without living in the now. I brought several impersonations to the topic, assumptions to the topic. The lesser known Crow, Hinman, and Shea felonies were ordinary criminal confrontations between people that knew each other. They were all about money, drugs, and snitching. The usual reason blood gets shed in the underworld. Despite all the mythology accrued around the more infamous Yellow and Waverly episodes, I wonder why suppose that they were any different than the utterly routine felonies that came before and after them. Let's say Belosi was 100% correct. And it was all about Beatles lyrics and Blackie. Charlie was aware that his notoriety brought him more followers in the 80s than he could have dreamed of in 69. Considering that if this guy was so gung-ho about unleashing Helter Skelter, why wasn't he using the international soapbox the mass media gave him to rant about ethnic apocalypse to the millions of many TV interviewers reached? Instead, he devoted his time to preaching about the urgent necessity of environmentalism. Bugliosi's deliberate removal of Tex Watson murders from their context as part of the series of interconnected drug-related crimes, and even knowing the man responsible for the murders from the picture altogether, created the false impression that the killings had just happened out of the blue, the whacked-out whims of a homicidal maniac. Once you understand how they were linked in the chain connected to the full year of sexual relations, drug deals, debts, and double-crossers, between a cast of characters we all know each other as part of the same social circle, the simple story told in court of the 1,000 rehashes of Helter Skelter quickly falls apart. Far from being somewhat bizarre anomaly in the annals of crime, several other ugly incidents resembles Watson's messy speed freakout. In July of 68, just a few years before I met Charlie, a gang of cocaine dealers were brutally slain at a known drug party house on Wonderland Avenue in the Hollywood Hills. These were carried out in retaliation for a robbery at the home of Sleazebag nightclub impresario and coke dealer Eddie Nash. Rumors of the lethal mob activity abounded. I met Nash a few more times in concerts at his Hollywood nightclubs, the Starwood and the Seven Seas. This cat owned the Starwood, man. So I followed the cash out to the morbid curiosity. Everything about the circumstances of the so-called Wonderland killings reminded me of what happened at Cielo, except the sober dawn of the Reagan era was no longer the climax of the hallucinogenic 60s, so no fantastic narrative was imputed on what was obviously just another vicious drug dealer vendetta among many. I couldn't help but put notice on a more direct link these similar crimes. Paul Caruso, the lawyer who represented or misrepresented Susan Atkins, served as Eddie Nash's defense attorney. Just call Paul on the rescue again when drug dealing turns deadly. He got Nash off, something he hadn't managed to swing for Sexy Sadie, but probably he never intended to in the first place. Bugliosi's Helter Skelter struck me as fiction from the first encounter with its unlikely plot. Everything Charlie said to me about the Bugs Buggy motive quickly confirmed that the Beatles' race war motive was a red herring not worthy of serious consideration. Had Charlie pontificated that the race war was brewing in the wake of the riots inspired by the King assassination and the increased militancy of the black Muslims? Yes, along with many others at the time. Did these socio-political musings have anything to do with the motive of the 9 murders he was convicted of conspiring to commit? No, but he's related. He was sending a message to Terry Melcher because he was angry about a broken promise concerning a proffered record contract. Did he send his programmed assassins to Cielo to kill the producer, not realizing that Terry had lived there for 7 months? On the contrary, Charlie offered ample evidence that he knew exactly where Melcher lived after his breakup with actress Candice Bergen, and that he was still on strained but speaking terms with Melcher and Dennis Wilson throughout '69, even a few weeks after the murders. Charlie detailed accounts of Melcher's supervised recording sessions and many other professional and personal entanglements between April of '68 and September of '69, painted a very different picture of their close relationship than the official narrative put forth. He gave me the impression that Melcher, the son of an abusive, neglected father, looked upon Charlie as a father figure and a mentor. Charlie admitted that there was never tension between them, but said that if I got a beef with someone, I'll handle it myself. I mean, I don't need no troops to take care of a cream puff like Terry Melcher. He spoke vaguely, but as if with significance, of a quarrel between the straight Satans and Melcher over Ruth Ann Morehouse, as nearly turning fatal. When I pressed him, details were scant. I sensed that Charlie and Melcher were both keeping the same secrets. I wondered if they may have been complicit in their mutual evasions about their associations. Melcher blandly lied about Charlie in court and in his few interviews thereafter. The producer's pretense that he barely knew the man whose music and philosophy he once championed to anyone who would listen was absurdly transparent. And yet it seemed that Charlie somehow still maintained a begrudgingly, even protective respect for his former friend. It would be first time in criminal history that it wouldn't be the first time in criminal history that two parties possessing sensitive information on each other entered a mutually beneficial conspiracy of silence. In a lesser extent, the same would be said of Altobelli, that Charlie only opened up about after the agent's death. What about the supposed satanic occult underpinnings of the crimes bandied about in the press, in the popular press during the 60s and early 70s magical revival? Had the same guru ordered the journalists routinely labeled ritual killings? As I got to know Charlie at the same time, I was still a diligent devil worshiper and ceremonial magician. Here, Nick Schreck's telling the truth about what he was practicing at the time. He's being honest. He later became a Buddhist. He lost his ear in studying this stuff. I found that the supposed cult leader was his own idiosyncratic way of devoted a Bible-believing Christian as could be. He's talking about Charlie. Nor did close examination of the utterly ordinary Watson, Kasabian, Atkins, Krenwinkel, Van Houten reveal any serious ritualistic practice or belief. The more I understood of the loose-linked tribe of Slippies, casually disorganized confederation, it was impossible to correlate the fairly run-of-the-mill commune as any kind of cult at all. Watson and Bruce Davis, usually described in their standard literature as the most fanatical followers of Manson, were away from the group for long stretches of time during the brief time that they knew him, actually totally living lives totally independent of their supposed master. Susan Atkins clearly did see Charlie as a messianic figure, managed to get plenty of trouble on her own outside of the commune, and was especially disobedient and defiant to him. Rather than force her to stay in his supposed cult, he tried to get her to leave several times. I'm going to stand up for Susan and say that she was forced by a bunch of these federal agents to do what she did, allegedly. A few fragments Charlie sketched of me about the slayings in the first years of our association were never let out in one coherent A to Z narrative, but the bits and pieces he initially put forth about the weekend hate-in at Cielo and Waverly Drive boiled down to this. In the day before the chaos went down, he was away from Spahn Ranch on a still mysterious road trip back and forth from San Diego, which seemed to be most notably about procuring drugs to collect cash. While on the road, he brooded about leaving the ranch altogether. The pressure of the Crow and Hinman calamities hung over his head. Looming threats he knew could not be put back in prison if the roll-in then was discovered. The resulting distance, increasingly violent behavior between him and his patrons, Dennis Wilson and Terry Melcher, left him a little reason to stay in Los Angeles. He stressed that he didn't get along well with that fuck-up Watson after the Crow confrontation went so badly. Consequently, he claimed to know little of what Tex and the newcomer to the ranch named Linda Kasabian were up to in the weeks before the midnight routing. Charlie consistently stated that he barely knew Kasabian. The brief time she was at the ranch tended to support his contention. If he was going to send soldiers into battle, Charlie said, with his customary comparison of crime to combat, he would never have trusted an untested near stranger like her with the job. His self-proclaimed motto, trust no man, Words given weight when I observed how suspicious he was, even after all those he knew well. I'm here to say that Linda Kasabian was in with Tex Watson. I was there. I saw it. Period. No lies. As an admirer of Al Capone, Frank Costello, and Lucky Luciano, Charlie didn't object to the least of the idea of sending gang members to settle scores, which is essentially what he was falsely accused of doing. That is why everyday business as usual in the prison and in the underworld. His argument was that he was going to order the commando execution raid that led to the insist this yellow robbery would have been done right, nobody would have ever been caught. He was offended by Bugliosi's accusations only in that they insulted his intelligence and his competence as a professional crook. Tex was sloppy, man. I don't leave no loose ends for someone else to fix, he grumbled to me. Tex was a mama's boy trying to impress his sweetheart, Linda Kasabian. Look at me. I'm a big man. I'm on campus. I wasn't part of what I had going on. What really is, he fucked it up. When he returned to the commune on August 8th, the girls closest to Charlie's friends and sometimes musical collaborator, Bobby Beausoleil, were in an uproar. The cocky kid, sometimes called Cupid, but others knew him as Bummer Bob, just got busted with another murder of his friend Gary Hinman. Bad news came in while Charlie was away. The possibility that the inexperienced Beausoleil might nervously snitch to the cops about Charlie's presence at the crime scene emerged as the latest sword of Damocles. That afternoon, Mary Bruner and Sandra Good went out on a shoplifting, stealing expedition with a stolen credit card that they never returned. The disappearance ramped up the tension. Only at late 11 p.m., after an hour and a half before Watson rang the doorbell at Cielo, the commune learned of a via call from jail that Good and Bruner had been busted. Ever since Watson's ripoff of Lots of Papa and Rosina Kroner, that was Watson's girlfriend, Charlie recalled the harmony on the ranch had shattered. The waves of the rippling out from the Hinman murders shortly thereafter were palpable even to those who didn't know the gory details. It seemed like there is now a major crisis every day, a series of hassles and downers exasperated by increased police harassment, a marked upstick in the commune's abuse of the notoriously paranoia-induced speed supplied by the straight Satans. Also frayed nerves on the formerly cheerful collective. During Charlie's absence, in the desperation to raise funds for a lawyer to represent Beausoleil, some of the women on the ranch turned tricks to raise quick cash. They didn't resume his old trade of wholesale pimping in the free love era. Charlie had already shared some of the tricks of the trade with them, teaching them, in his phrase, how to get more bucks for the bang. Charlie advised them that paying an attorney to represent Bobby was futile. To his experience, lawyers never helped. However, I do believe that at least some of these involved with the crimes may have really believed that the robbery was supposedly at least part of the good cause of raising cash to pay a lawyer to represent Beausoleil. Atkins briefly and credibly refers to this angle as a statement about motive she made to the court, which I cite at the beginning of this chapter. Many years later, in one of the last interviews, Charlie told Rolling Stone that he never rat on a commune member who dreamed up the scheme. But he told me fairly early, and the most enthusiastic cheerleader for this plan was Susan Atkins. That made sense. She'd been a witness to Beausoleil's panicky stabbing in Hinman. Charlie said she feared Bobby might snitch about her role to the Hinman killing. Charlie maintained that her screwy plan to save Bobby was motivated by her own self-preservation than any flower-child altruism. So the same pinpoint from her spawn sisterhood, Sexy Sadie, dreamt the daft idea. I will say that she was forced into the same cell room with all the Manson members by her attorneys, and that was illegal. And so all the Manson members made her lie. That's what happened. Charlie told me several times that he emphasized to the girls in favor of this copycat strategy that it was a stupid idea, that it would never work. But it always, he told me, that he should do what they thought was right. In short, he consistently claimed that this was all wacky but weirdly well-intended girl's idea. I know drugs impair one's logic, but he never made sense to me of what of those involved with the Hinman slaying were so worried Bobby would snitch on them and send them to prison, why take the gigantic risk of committing 7 other highly visible murders that practically guaranteed incarceration and execution? His role in this particular crime, Charlie maintained, was an accessory. He copped for being guilty for not snitching on his friends and lovers. Despite several drastic contradictions in the variations of these memories he played to me, he never changed his claim to his philosophical, insightful, but largely rhetorical filibuster of a testimony at his trial that he didn't order anyone to be killed. Most of our early discussions about the crimes took place around the time Charlie was argued about the release of Edmunds' book. In that volume, Edmunds quoted Charlie as saying at the Cielo Drive murders, "My only concern was whether it resembled the Hinman killings. Would the police now have reason to believe that Bobby was not the slayer of Hinman?" In verbiage and content, this passage struck me because it didn't sound remotely like anything Charlie would ever say. Furthermore, it contradicted the insistence that the girls already conceived of the crime while he was on the road. When I announced, meaning Nick, when I announced a benefit concert aiming at raising funds for the lawyer who agreed to represent Charlie's appeal for a mistrial, one outraged music critic cited Edmunds' book as proof that Charlie had confessed to being responsible for the murders. I asked Charlie if this quote in question was accurate. "Mel," he said wearily, "took a little bit of what I said and mixed it up in what he wanted me to say. I wish I was a cult leader mastermind I keep hearing about. I'm so fucking stupid even Mel could play me. Edmunds' first name was Melton." In 1987, letters to Edmunds from the same time period that I only recently discovered, Charlie wrote much of the same as he told me. "Man, you butchered me in that book. You got me saying what you would have said and doing what you would have been doing. You would live with the book the rest of your life. To me, it's just another in a long line of people saying how no good I am, and they call me crazy each time they look in the mirror." Curiously absent from Charlie's various accounts was an explanation of why Tex Watson, who as far as I could tell was not even particularly close to Beausoleil, attacked his victims with a savagery that showed every indication of being triggered by a deep emotional vendetta. For the bloody night at Waverly after the Cielo massacre, Charlie rarely mentioned at all during the earliest years of the friendship. When he did grumble about straight Satan Danny DiCarlo, the motorcycle club treasurer, Donkey Dan as he was known, had a lot to lose if he dragged him into Hinman murder investigation. Charlie insisted that the biker was responsible for instigating Beausoleil to confront Hinman about drug money. Danny DiCarlo is related to Yvonne DiCarlo. Beausoleil had confirmed this. To his credit, he was the only one of Charlie's former associates who hadn't blamed his crime on commands to kill from Charlie. Charlie said that DiCarlo took part of this copycat brainstorming session held up in the hills over a campfire and was thus complicit in the Tate LaBianca. He expressed a seething disdain for DiCarlo, denouncing his former crime partner as a rat and informant. DiCarlo, he said, got away with murder thanks to a deal forged with Deputy District Attorney Bugliosi, agreeing to drop charges in exchange for testifying against Charlie. On one hand, Charlie sympathized with any fellow crook who eluded the long arm of the law, but not in DiCarlo's case. He expressed resentment. He asserted that Bugliosi and DiCarlo were in cahoots because they served the same master, the mob. He was adamant that the Satans were used to carry out street-level hits for a higher echelon of mafiosi. So you got, a biker gang is a gang, a criminal gang, that's right. He asserted that Bugliosi and DiCarlo were in cahoots because they served the same master, the mob. He was adamant that the Satans were used to carry out street-level hits for a higher echelon of mafioso. What confused me was that Charlie routinely connected DiCarlo to all the crimes: Crow, Hinman, Tate, LaBianca, and Shorty Shea. It would be many years before he finally explained to me the real source of the hatred for DiCarlo. I'm going to stop here because this is a long chapter. The next part of this chapter is going to go into all the mafiosa people that were involved in all this stuff. That might be the chapter after. But anyway, we're going to stop now. I'm going to say thanks to all the vinyl community. I was able to go live stream today because I got 150 likes on my shorts. So please like and subscribe and share so I can keep reading out the truth here. We pray for peace.